Hello and welcome to my GCSE Biology video on transport in cells, active transport. This video will also include a comparison between the three different processes of diffusion, osmosis and active transport. So please do look at my other videos on diffusion and osmosis to help you with this section of the video. Sometimes substances are required to move against the concentration gradient. So active transport can be defined as the following. It moves substances from a more dilute solution to a more concentrated solution against a concentration gradient. And this requires energy from respiration. So if we look at the analogy of movement of molecules down a slide, well, in diffusion, they're from a high concentration and they go down a concentration gradient from a high concentration to a low concentration, or we could say from a more dilute to a more concentrated solution. However, in active transport, it's got to go the opposite way, so it's got to go from a low concentration to a high concentration, and that's moving against a concentration gradient. And as you can imagine, if you're going to move up a slide, it's going to take a lot more energy than if you slide down the slide. So moving up is going to mean that you require energy. And for cells, they use ATP as a source of energy, and that is made in the mitochondria. Here's another analogy. So for example, on the left is diffusion. Okay, so we've got diffusion on here, and you can see that if you are rolling a boulder down a hill, it's pretty easy. It will just roll down on its own, and it's known as passive transport. Whereas active transport, it means that you're moving up against the concentration gradient. So that's going to take a lot more energy to move things against that concentration gradient. Okay, so here we have a partially permeable membrane, and you'll notice that we've got some ATP. ATP is the source of energy for respiration, and you can see that ATP is required to move the molecules from where they're in a low concentration or where they're in a dilute solution to a more concentrated solution. So it needs to move it against that concentration gradient. Here's an example of where active transport occurs. This is a root hair cell, so it's found in roots in plants. And as you notice, you've got mineral ions, and these mineral ions are in much lower concentrations outside in the soil. Okay, they're basically in a very dilute solution. So these ions, these mineral ions, can be absorbed against the concentration gradient into the root hair cell. So this allows the movement of important molecules into an organism. Root hair cells contain a lot of mitochondria because they need to have a high rate of respiration to allow active transport to occur. So let's think about the comparisons, the differences and similarities between all three types of transport mechanisms in cells. If you haven't already seen the diffusion and osmosis videos, then please do have a look at them before you attempt this question. So what you need to do is place the features in the correct part of the Venn diagram. So just as a reminder that if it's in both diffusion and osmosis, you would stick it into this part. Okay, if it was just in diffusion and active transport, you'd stick it in there. If it was in osmosis and active transport, in there. If it's all of them, in there. If it's just diffusion, in there. If it's osmosis, just there. And active transport, just there. What I suggest is you pause the video at this stage, because I'm going to show you the answers in a minute. Okay, and here are the answers. Make sure you look at the differences between them and the similarities, as this could come up in an exam question. Hope you found this video useful. I'll see you next time.